Good morning, everybody. Bonjour tout le monde. Welcome to the 13th Tech Access Canada Best Practices Workshop. The format will be familiar to last year. Plenary sessions on the agenda will take place here in the microsite. The chat box is where you can ask questions, and then the breakout rooms will be for the concurrent sessions, the networking lounge, and the small affinity group discussions. So without further ado, we want to dive right into the content. So I'm going to pass the stage over to Chloé Bois, Executive Director of ICI and Board Member of Tech Access Canada. Chloé?
Bonjour à tous. Hi everyone. So I'm very happy to hosting that first session, especially on EDI. C'est vraiment un plaisir d'être ici avec vous et de pouvoir modérer cette.
It is a pleasure to be here and act as moderator for the first session concerning the presentation on equity, diversity, and inclusion. I know to what extent it was a very discussed topic with the request of the correct.
Those okay, this actually how to say that, but this theme, especially due to the RTP contest that most of us are actually trained to apply for. So this is why we discuss weekend, and we are very happy to have Dr. Wendy Sukir that accepted to help us and to give us lots of ideas to have better action to implement in our centers, but also for our communities, and also to have more success in the ground, especially we know that we have some criteria on that. So let me introduce Wendy. So she is a professor of entrepreneurship and strategy and founder of the Diversity Institute at Ryerson University. She is a co-author of the bestseller Innovation Nation, Canadian Leadership from Java to Jurassic Park, and former VP of Research and Innovation, and she had more than 200 articles co-written on aspect of diversity, inclusion, innovation. So the Diversity Institute, I think you call that DI, so please correct me if not. So she has more than 100 research staff, and projects include diversity leads, which has tracked the representation of women in leadership role, and a host of projects focused especially on women in technology. Wendy received many awards for her work advancing diversity and inclusion, including the Meritorious Service Cross, one of Canada's highest civilian honors. So we are very lucky to have her. She also mentioned that she has a very unstable connection today. So this is why maybe sometime she will have a picture of her instead of having her directly with us. And I also take that opportunity to share with you in the main chat some documents. So there is a document from NSERG on the Dimension Charter, but also two other documents that were provided. So every time it's French and English. They were provided by the Diversity Institute and the team, especially with vocabulary and good wording that we can use when we do our ground. So let me share that with you in the chat. You have all the link, and now I can give the floor to Wendy. Please go ahead. So, I forgot one thing. So please, during the presentation, I will be the one checking for the questions directly in the chat, and Wendy will be happy to answer the question during her presentation. So we'll have like a 45 minutes presentation, including the questions at the same time. So we'll have a look at all the questions in the chat. En français et en anglais, s'il vous plaît. Durant la présentation, je vais...
Yes, so in French or in English, during the presentation, I'll be able to ask the questions directly to Wendy. So do not hesitate, please, to write down your questions in the chat window. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much for including me. And I apologize, but my French is horrible, so I will do the presentation in English. I also wanted to say that this is I guess I'm focused on trying to share some of the lessons learned from working with incubators and accelerators across the country, as well as I'm on the board of REMAP, which is one of the industry-led centers of excellence. And while my presentation may not give you the concrete advice that you want for completing your applications, I'm happy to share in writing some of the guidelines that we've developed, for example, for the Future Skills Center that can be shared with all of you. So thanks very much for attending today. I also want to start by saying that I'm joining you from the traditional Nzidita of the Credit, the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, and the Wendat peoples here in Toronto. And regardless of where anyone is joining us from across the country, they're probably on, well, they are on Indigenous land. Why I think it's particularly important to acknowledge that is, I think many of us, I can't speak for all of you, but I think many of us were shocked and appalled at the discovery of the unmarked graves of initially 215 Indigenous children, which has grown to thousands. And, you know, I was preparing to, I was trying to figure out what we should do, because Ryerson is, of course, in the process of changing its name, and there's a lot of sensitivity around some of these issues. And I wrote a statement, and I sent it to my Indigenous staff. And the statement said something like, "I'm shocked and appalled, and this is you know, unacceptable, and we have to work on truth and reconciliation." And they wrote back to me and they said, "Why are you shocked? We knew this. Why didn't you?" And for me, that was a real wake-up call, because, you know, of course I knew about murdered and missing Indigenous women. And of course I knew about the Truth and Reconciliation report and its findings in a very general way. But I really didn't understand in a visceral way what the impact of this was. And so when people talked about things like intergenerational trauma, for instance, I really didn't get it in the way that I think I get it more now. And I mention that because these issues are incredibly challenging to talk about, and even more challenging to move from good intentions to things that will really make a difference. And even though I've been working on this stuff for 30 years, and I have co-investigators who are Indigenous, and we've done projects with the Canadian Council of Aboriginal Business, I realize that I am constantly learning about how to navigate in this space. And so I share that because I think it's important. You know, even though I'm theoretically an expert in diversity and inclusion, I find that every week I'm learning something new. I'm having to adjust and adapt. And part of it is generational. You know, the environment that I grew up in was really, really different than the environment my daughter has grown up in. And the expectations of behavior have shifted dramatically. You know, when I started my career, I was working with engineers in a government department, and they had pictures of sunshine girls on the wall. They talked about women's bodies all the time in front of us. And the one time they took me out for lunch, it was to a strip club, so they could see how I would react. And that was where I started my career, in a government agency. So you can see, in some ways we've made tremendous progress, but in other ways not. I started working on issues of diversity and inclusion in technology following the Montreal massacre. So 1989, in early 1990, I was tasked with doing equity and diversity training for all the first-year engineers at Ryerson. And today, 30 years later, we have fewer women in computer science and only marginally more in engineering than we did 30 years ago, in spite of all the astronauts talking about STEM, in spite of all the, you know, the posters, in spite of, you know, Engineer Barbie. We have made very, very little progress. And so as much as it may have thrown many of you for a loop in seeing that the federal government is starting to really demand actions and accountability within the ecosystem, I think it's partly a function of knowing that we've been doing a lot of stuff for a long time, and it actually isn't having the impact as quickly as many people would like. So I start our conversation with that point, but also to say, you know, we are really happy to try to provide you with some concrete advice and guidance to move forward. And I spent 15 minutes of a presentation yesterday with people not being able to see my slides. Are the slides still showing, Chloe?
Yes, we can see them perfectly. Thank you,
Okay,
Wendy.
great. So about the Diversity Institute, it was set up in 1999. We have 100 full-time researchers. We run a lot of different projects. We're in a business school, so while we are committed to social justice, we have a very strong focus on the business case. We run incubation projects across the country, typically focused on women entrepreneurs, Black entrepreneurs, refugee or newcomer entrepreneurs. And we're also the research lead for the 50-30 challenge, which is one of the government commitments to increase gender parity and diversity in leadership roles on boards. We have projects on women in technology. We're the research lead for the Future Skills Center, and so on and so on. So we do a lot of stuff with a lot of different people. And as I mentioned, our focus is very much on this notion of the business case, that you know, if you're not embedding diversity and inclusion into all of your processes, whether those are the processes you use to hire staff or whether they're the processes you use to recruit clients, you're fishing in too small a pool. And so, you know, making sure that diversity and inclusion is embedded through organizations is critical to providing access to the best and the brightest, and to responding to increasingly diverse markets. I'm sure some of you, and as well as innovation, I'm sure some of you have heard the story, but there was a woman who made a pitch to a team of investors for a product, an invention that she had come up with, and they turned her down. And the product was pantyhose that does not run. And for the women on the call, the perception of that as a market opportunity would have been very different, I suspect, than the perception of the men who were judging that initial pitch by sheer text. So we know increasingly that that as markets are more diverse, particularly with respect to women exercising purchasing power, but also you know, the growing percentage of immigrants and racialized people and Indigenous people are the fastest growing segment of the population, that diversity and inclusion are really important in driving access to markets. We also know that they affect employee engagement and reduce turnover. And we're in an environment where suddenly the labor market is shifted. And I don't know about folks on the phone, but we're desperate for talent and to keep people that are being poached. So having an environment where people feel welcome and can bring their whole self to work is critically important. And then there's also the legal and reputational risks. If you get this wrong, you can undo a huge amount of work that you've put into branding. And some of you may have seen the Hudson's Bay Company disclosure where they said they were creating a BIPOC committee, and they forgot I stood for Indigenous, and they didn't have anyone from the Indigenous community on it. And there have been many, many examples we can think of. So when we approach this, we think about it from an ecosystem perspective. It's great that the government is investing in the women entrepreneurship strategy. It's great that the government is investing in the Black entrepreneurship strategy. And I'm on the board of the Federation of African Canadian Economics, which has, I think, $260 million in loans to administer. All great. It's great that there's a strategy focused specifically on increasing access to markets for Indigenous peoples. But those investments are really a drop in the bucket if you think about all of the money that goes into economic development and innovation across Canada. And so really our mission is not just to support, funded programs that have women in the title, but we're really looking at how we drive inclusion across the entire ecosystem. And that means the banks. The banks remain barriers to women accessing funding, to Black people accessing funding, and indeed to accessing mortgages. We're taking on those issues, looking at policies. Those of you who are in Quebec will I think, know this very clearly, but COVID made it clear for the rest of the world, in fact, that childcare is not a women's issue. Childcare is an economic issue. And if you have access to affordable childcare, you will see more women in leadership roles, more women entrepreneurs, more women able to contribute to the broader economy. So we're looking at this through a systems lens. And I'm not going to go through these details because, you can get on our website and look at the reports, or you'll get copies of the presentation. But just to highlight a few really important issues, I think, when we're thinking about these issues from a systemic perspective. So one of the most important ones is typically when we define entrepreneurs, we define them as owner of an SME with employees. And when you use that as your metric, women are about 16% of majority owners of SMEs in Canada. It's about 110,000 across the country. However, if you change your definition of entrepreneur and you include people who are self-employed, 38% of them are women, and they're 1 million. So that's a very simple example of how many programs have embedded in them the definition of entrepreneur as SME, which excludes basically 90% of the women entrepreneurs. And there are cases where that's not going to change in the short term, but there are cases where funders are starting to look at that and figure out other ways to address it in the design of their programs. We know it's also an issue for Indigenous people who are less likely to be incorporated. It's an issue for Black entrepreneurs and so on and so forth. So that's just one example of a structural barrier that lots of people haven't thought about. The other issue is that women and many diverse entrepreneurs are more likely to be in services than they are in tech. So if you equate innovation with technology creation and IP creation, as opposed to technology adoption, you're going to miss a lot. And this is just an example that was done by the Black Business Professional Association, comparing the impact of COVID to members of the Canadian Federation of Independent Business versus the Black Business Professional Association. And what you see on every metric is that COVID hit Black businesses twice as hard, at least, but they had half as much access to supports. So if you look at do not have the capacity to take on debt, 50% plus of Canadian Federation of Independent Businesses said that was true. When you ask Black businesses, 96%. And yet a lot of the COVID relief programs focused on loans. The barriers to Indigenous entrepreneurs have to do with the rules around owning property on reserve, have to do with the access to infrastructure, of Indigenous peoples live in remote and rural areas. A lot of them don't have access to running water, and they certainly don't have access to high-speed internet. So again, you may see, access to high-speed internet as a technology issue, but it's fundamentally a social justice and economic issue. And affordability of internet is a big issue even in large cities among certain populations. Similarly, with persons with disabilities, entrepreneurship can actually offer a very flexible, adaptable kind of pathway to economic inclusion for persons with disabilities, but the systems don't really support them. And similarly, newcomer entrepreneurs, newcomers are more likely to actually be successful entrepreneurs than people who are born in Canada. But incubators, accelerators, even the conventions around pitching and so on, often are very much at odds with their culture. So I'll pause there for a moment just to see if there are any questions so far or comments.
No, thank you, Wendy. But so far there are no questions in the comments, so I invite the audience to do not hesitate to write your questions. So, il n'y a pas encore de questions dans le chat, donc j'invite notre audience à.
Oh, there are no questions in the chat. I would ask the attendants to take up the opportunity to ask the questions in the chat so I can transfer those questions to Wendy. Thank you. You can continue.
On diversity and inclusion concepts. And I will, as I said, as I promised, provide something in writing that's a little more directed to the applications that you're filling out. If somebody sends me the link to the application, then I'll provide some suggestions. But getting the language right is really important. And so when we're talking about gender, gender is socially constructed. It has to do with how you identify. And historically, we talked about men and women, and now we're talking about men and women and non-binary. Sex is what you were assigned at birth, male or female. And while there's controversy about how that is even assessed, that's the distinction. When you're talking about gender, you talk about men and women and non-binary people. When you talk about sex, you talk about male and female. There's also a controversy around the term, which is in the legislation, of visible minority. More commonly, people now talk about racialized people, but that too has some baggage associated with it, especially because people are arguing we have to disaggregate the data and look, for example, specifically at Black entrepreneurs. So what we now recommend is people just use the Stats Canada categories. Again, I can share that with you rather than necessarily asking people if they're racialized or not. Indigenous peoples, same thing. Aboriginal people is what's in the Employment Equity Act, but that has been critiqued. So we typically talk about Indigenous peoples. We don't talk about Native people. We don't talk about Indians. And there's a lot of power in words, and trying to keep up with some of this is challenging. People with disabilities or people living with disabilities, the whole notion of disability has changed from people with mobility issues or in wheelchairs or who are visually impaired or deaf to a much broader cluster that would include, for example, people with cognitive differences or people with mental health issues. So understanding the definition of disability in the legislation is important. And then, of course, we get issues around gender identity and sexual orientation. And LGBTQ2S+ is the most common expression, I think, although there are variations of that. And we recently did a 6-month consultation for the federal government on all of these terms and can provide access to, the detailed research and explanations. I will also note that there are differences in Quebec than the ROC, and also that people within these communities have different ways they want to be described. So for example, among people living with disabilities, some want to be called deaf. Some want to be called mad, but ascribing those terms to people or imposing those definitions on people is more of a challenge. So when we think about bias, I think overt racism is fairly obvious. Calling an Indigenous woman names as she is dying seems fairly overt. Kneeling on someone's neck and killing them during an arrest is fairly overt. So there are lots of examples we can think of overt bias. What's harder to get a handle on is what we're referring to now as unconscious bias. And I can share with you my own experience. I've worked on women in technology for 30 years. And when I did the Harvard implicit bias test, it showed very clearly that if I'm forced to make decisions quickly, I associate men with technology and women with art. And we all have those biases that are built in. What becomes important is being able to stop ourselves and recognize when our biases are kicking in, and to be more objective and fair. The other thing that's hard to get a handle on is the way in which bias is built into organizations and into practices. And this is where, I'm going to explain some things that I think may be of use when you're looking at your applications, because one of the things you want to do is show that you understand that that doing a good job on diversity and inclusion is not just about checking boxes, but also about really thinking carefully about your processes and how you design them in order to be more inclusive.
So, Wendy, I have some
Yeah.
question in the chat.
Sure.
I think Catherine actually provided super interesting test on, auto test for implicit bias as well. There is a question that it's the slide 11, I think. It's for disabilities. There was a question that there is a challenge to ensure that the verbiage is positive instead of negative. So the question is the language changing to accessibility? Not sure if
Absolutely. And as I said, and I hope Catherine's put our 50/30 publicly available specifications. So even the new legislation makes reference, for example, to impairment. And there was a very negative reaction to the use of the word impairment, because it implies there's something wrong with people with disabilities, when in fact, people face barriers because of the way society treats them. And so there is huge sensitivity around those issues, and we could do a whole session talking through those, but you want to avoid words like impairment. You want to avoid words like talking about learning disabilities. We now talk more about cognitive differences, which recognize that, for instance, in some contexts, ADHD is an advantage, not a disadvantage. I hope that answers the question. But again, we can provide some background on that.
We share actually two documents with all the adequate verbiage. So on a partagé dans le chat deux documents en français et en anglais.
We've shared documents in French and in English, all of the proper terminology to be used
in regional contexts rather than urban. So the example was in a community that is 80, I think it's the age 80 plus, maybe its percentage is white people. How do you have recommendation? How do we foster a culture of change?
Yeah, I think, this may help answers to a certain extent. So diversity and inclusion is very different. If you go to St. John's, Newfoundland, I think the stat is 7% of the population is racialized, compared to Toronto, where it's more than 50%, and Montreal, where I think it's maybe close to 30%. So what you're going to be able to do with respect to issues around race, very, very different in St. John's, Newfoundland than it is in Toronto. So we have to always think about context. But in rural communities, I think that one of the issues that is often forgotten is socioeconomic differences. And so when we talk about privilege, there's no question that if you're white, you have a certain level of privilege. But if you grew up poor, you have less privilege than if you grew up rich. If you grew up with parents who both spoke English and could help you with your studies, or who went to university, or covered the cost of your education so you didn't have to work 25 hours a week, you have a certain kind of privilege. I already mentioned, one of the issues in rural communities is around access to the internet. There are also gender issues in rural communities. So I think it's important to recognize that this is not just about skin color or race. There are different dimensions to how we think about access and privilege. And there's no question in Canada that in rural communities, people have less access.
Okay, this is very, very interesting. And I think you can also help us to actually lead some actions toward socioeconomic privilege and, internet connection, access, stuff like that. Yeah, very interesting. Thank you.
Can you still hear and see me?
We can't see you, but we hear you well, and we see your slide very well.
Okay, great.
So please go ahead.
So systemic discrimination is where you build these biases into your policies and programs. And that's part of the reason why we believe that you need to take an ecological approach, which addresses and reflects and thinks about context and culture, because organizations don't live in a vacuum. They are affected by local culture, or regional culture, national culture. And similarly, individuals that work in organizations face certain things. So when we think about societal level issues, we think about values and stereotypes. We think about policies, and we think about broader socioeconomic issues. If you do a Google image search on entrepreneur, you're likely to get a lot of white men in tech, even though we know that these are a relatively small proportion of entrepreneurs. Because there's some folks from Quebec, for example. It may interest you to know that Celine Dion is one of the richest entrepreneurs in Canada, but we don't often think about entrepreneurs in cultural industries. And we have a whole campaign around See It, Be It, which is profiling women. And if you focus on science, technology, engineering, and math, this is what you're going to get, because women tend to be underrepresented in those areas. Indigenous people tend to be underrepresented in those areas, even though racialized people are overrepresented. Like the IT sector has a higher percentage of racialized people than the general population. It isn't to say that science, technology, engineering, and math aren't important, but innovation is not just about developing new technologies. And that's why I actually really like your program, because it recognizes that adoption is actually critically important, that using technology is really important. Think about, think again about how we define entrepreneurs. Kylie Jenner, one of the Kardashians, was a billionaire at the age of 20 because she used Shopify, a Canadian tech platform, to sell the goop that she sells under her brand name. But, the digital supercluster probably wouldn't have gone, oh, Kylie Jenner, you're a digital entrepreneur, come work for us. And so we have to constantly fight this notion that the people who make the technology are the only people driving innovation. When we think about rural Canada, Farming is one of the fastest growing areas where we're seeing the use of the Internet of Things. They're not filing patents, but for sure, they are driving innovation. And so that's something, at that macro level, we have to constantly think about. Codes, legislation, you're starting to see the impact of the government putting its money where its mouth is and respond with concrete examples. And I mentioned the 50-30 challenge. I believe that as we go forward, there's going to be more and more scrutiny of things like boards and leadership in order to get access to funding and programs. And so, again, the 50-30 challenge is something we're working on. 50 refers to gender parity, 30 refers to other kinds of diversity on boards and in leadership roles.
I would like just to interject, like Wendy. So we have now 15 minutes left to the presentation. So I would like to ask once again the audience if they have questions. So il nous reste 15 minutes dans la présentation. Donc,
we have 15 minutes left in this presentation. Don't hesitate to ask your questions.
I really recommend the 50-30 challenge. This is where we started at ICI, learning about all those, the theme. It's really helpful. Please go ahead, Wendy.
Great. So this next section has many, many, many slides. I am not going to do all the slides, but I will make the presentation available to you so you can dig in on any of these issues that may help you in formulating a diversity and inclusion strategy, which you want to talk about in your application. So I'll give you high level, and then you can, and some examples, and you can read more about these things at your leisure. So we get to the important points through this process. So when we think about diversity, it's not just about checking boxes and counting how many people you have that are like this or like that. It's really about embedding it through your processes, through your governance, through your value chain, and I'll talk more about that, how you design your programs, as well as your HR practices and your culture. And metrics, as you know, are very important. So when we think about leadership and governance, here we're talking about looking at who's on your board, your advisory committees, who's running the shop, whether you have a mission statement that addresses issues around diversity, the level of the commitment of the organization. And we have a whole series of questions that you can go through that look at those things. Similarly, when we look at human resources practices, how you recruit staff, how you define the jobs, how you select people, all of those things become very important as well. And again, lots of specific questions. Are your job postings made public? And do you have language that is inclusive for women in diverse groups, for example? So lots around HR that you can look at. And some of you may be embedded in college policies and practices. So looking at those is important. Your values and your culture. How do you communicate that people are welcome? Good example is I've been on a number of boards where they have Christmas parties. Well, if you have a Christmas party and you have people who are Muslim, they're not going to, or Jewish, or a different religion, they're not going to feel welcome. If you serve alcohol, there are certain people who are not going to feel welcome. So there are ways you really have to think about what you do to communicate that people are welcome. It's not just about your policies, it's about those practices and how you treat each other. So lots of questions again about organizational culture. What gets measured gets done, and we're working really hard with the federal government to develop metrics so we can track better what the impacts of things are. It's very important to have data disclosure around identity. And you can do this. A lot of people think they can't ask questions about applicants or staff. You can ask, you just can't force people to answer. That's the thing that's critically important. And so, the issues around self-identification are very important, and explaining to people why you're asking for the information, explaining to people that it's voluntary is super important. But the rate at which people will self-identify, this is a very important point, the rate at which people self-identify is in and of itself an indicator of inclusion. For example, the year that IBM announced that it was going to support gender reassignment surgery, the number of people who self-identified as LGBTQ2S+ increased by 250%. It wasn't that suddenly they hired more gay, lesbian, transgendered, bisexual people. It was that people felt safe to say who they were. And that becomes a really important issue in organizations. And so we have all kinds of metrics in our diversity assessment tool that you might want to look at when you're talking about what your strategy is. Similarly, sorry.
Wendy, if I may, yeah, I have two comments and questions that may be helpful. So we have one that is, how can we take a little step to incorporate meritocracy and EDI? And the second is, how can we actually make banks, being companies and politicians, really do something instead of having the feeling that EDI is like the population is pointed at and asked to change things?
Really important questions. And, very often the issue of meritocracy is presented as in opposition to inclusion. So the best example I can think of is the City of Toronto. The City of Toronto is more than 50% racialized and 50% women. So if you have policies that are targeting white men and not inclusive of women or racialized people, you have access to 25% of the population. That's what I mean about fishing in a very small pond. So in fact, doing a good job of equity, diversity, and inclusion ensures that you have better access to talent, to the best and the brightest ideas, and that you're not missing out on opportunities like SheerTechs. I think in terms of the accountability within organizations, at the end of the day, money talks. And I do think that consumers and stakeholders, more and more focus is on environmental, social, and governance issues at the board level in large corporations. That's having an impact. There is more legislation that's having an impact. And consumers are starting to apply a lens around equity, diversity, and inclusion. You can imagine what happened to Starbucks when that story broke about waiting while black, 2 Black men being forced to leave the store while others were standing around and waiting. The damage that you can do to your organization if you get this wrong is very, very significant. So I think that, organizations, for the most part, make decisions based on economic choices. Will we get more customers? Will we get more funding? Will we be more successful? And that's why we're very focused on the business case. But if that doesn't work, I think the stick is equally concerning. About 17% of people in Ontario have live with a disability, but 55% have a member of their immediate family with a disability. And I can tell you, if I hear about a grocery store treating a kid with autism in a bad way, I don't identify as being on the autism spectrum, but I have a nephew who is very autistic, and that will have an impact on how I interact. So, you know, customers matter, investors matter, and these issues are becoming more important. I hope
See,
that
so
answers the
when,
question.
yeah, I think it is great. And that we have commented that the presentation is excellent. So we have 5 minutes left. So I've noticed that all the questions that actually were in the previous slides are like, you told us that you will share those like those auto diagnostics with us, right? Because
Absolutely.
they were, yeah, they was really perfect that how can some action that we can take directly in our colleges and with our activities.
So can I will wrap up, I promise, on time. I just want to hit a couple of other highlights.
Yes,
if I
please.
may.
So I think just continue, and 10:50 I will tell you to wrap up. So please go ahead.
Okay, great. So you all understand the concept of the value chain and understanding processes within organizations. This is very important to incubators and accelerators to really start to unpack how they design their programs, their procurement policies, who they reach out to. You know, we found with some of the government programs we've looked at, they go to the tech incubators and accelerators to find clients. Well, if you go to the tech incubators and accelerators, already talked to you about some of the issues that we see as barriers there. Again, you're fishing in too small a pool. So you have to think about other strategies to engage with other people. This affects your application processes, this affects your marketing, this affects your communication, how you reach out, how you form partners, how you engage with the community, how you build capacity. And so again, lots of specific examples. The tracking and measurement I know is particularly important to you. And there's lots and lots of guidance around, you know, procurement issues, encouraging SMEs to get their certifications if they're majority women owned or majority owned by other groups. Thinking about your evaluation criteria, and this is where we will follow up and provide you with some more information. And we've got some really good examples from surveys that we've done that, again, you can look at and you can think about whether this applies to you. And the final point that I really want to leave you with is that we need to think not just about the systems, but also about what we do as individuals. And to the extent that all of us have biases, all of us have history, all of us have demographic characteristics, learning to walk in other people's shoes, thinking about where these barriers may exist. We talk about lifting as we climb, being a mentor, reaching out to people who you wouldn't normally associate with and trying to engage with them. And most importantly, don't be a bystander, because we know every time there is a terrible example of sexism, racism, anti-Indigenous behavior, someone with a disability being mocked or tortured for others is really the basis of being an ally. And for me, these issues become very, very important. And I'll just end with this headline from Forbes magazine, ADHD, the entrepreneur's superpower. In some areas, ADHD is considered a learning disability. We know from the research, it's actually an advantage in entrepreneurship, even though people with ADHD may present themselves differently than others. So I'd like to stop there. I might have a chance for one last question before I let you all go.
Thank you very, very much, Tonya. Wendy, this was really amazing. So I don't see any more questions in the chat. So we have, I think, 5 minutes left for people if they want to ask questions. On my side, as you did your presentation in English, would you actually like to give us 3 headlines that I can actually translate right now in French for everyone, just to summarize your presentation?
And we actually have a lot of this material in French as well, especially around the the definitions. So I think the most important things are to build, I can see my internet's not working, build diversity and inclusion into your strategy from the beginning to the end. And that means looking at your mission and goals, your metrics, but also your processes and how you make your processes, your applications, and your services more inclusive. So that's 5, but it's 1. The second thing is
Oh, we
understand
lost you.
everybody
Lost you.
is
We
learning.
we
And
we
this
lost you,
feels very.
Wendy.
Oh, sorry.
Okay.
Can you
Can
hear
you
me
start
now?
again with number 2? Yeah, can you start again with number 2?
Sure. Number 2 is it's a learning journey. Even the experts don't know everything. And so you have to be open to recognizing that it's a changing field and we're all learning. And 3, you can make a difference. It doesn't matter if you're a secretary or you're a CEO. You have influence and you yourself can make a difference to move this forward.
Ok, so je vais me permettre de traduire ces 3 points importants en français.
So I'm going to translate these 3 important points in French. The first one is that you truly need to integrate EDI into your organization from the beginning to the end by including EDI into your mission, objectives, all your indicators and metrics, all your processes and services. The second point from Wendy, to summarize, is that it is truly a journey. It's you're traveling. Even experts don't know everything, so you need to recognize that everything changes constantly, and that we all need to learn through this adventure. The third point is that each individual can make a difference. Each individual has an impact to contribute to EDI.
I don't see any more. J'ai pas vu d'autres questions.
I don't see any further questions.
Do you want to have the final words?
No, just thanks for including me, and we're more than happy to work with the network to provide more support and help, because you play such an important role in the ecosystem. The more we can help you, the more we can achieve our goals.
Merci beaucoup, Wendy. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you very much, Wendy.
Comments about your presentation in the chat. So thank you again. Merci beaucoup. Puis à bientôt. Puis je vais laisser la.
Thank you very much, and see you soon. I will let Ken take the floor. Enjoy the best practices workshop.
What an excellent session. What a great way to get us started today. We're going to just keep diving right into the content. Couple of notes. The microsite that everybody's on has been updated, so maybe hit refresh. You shouldn't lose the chat messages. They should still stay there. Agenda issue's been fixed. There are 2 streams. A lot of this was covered in the chat, an English stream and a French stream. So we'll invite all the presenters to please just pick one language and stick with it for their presentation. And then the viewers can listen through whatever channel is their preference. So with that, we're a little bit ahead of schedule, but that's okay. I'd like to invite our next panel to join us. So the next session is TAC leaders discussing TAC human resources and management best practices. This will be a really interesting one as well. So I'd like to invite Natalie Metat, Deleola, Jean Duval to join us, and then we'll get started. So I believe I will hand it over to Natalie to get us going.
Bonjour tout le monde, ça me fait très plaisir d'être
Hi everyone, I'm very happy to be with you today. It would be much better if we were together in person rather than virtual. The next 2 presentations will be in French. I wanted to let you know beforehand. I will share my screen.
Voilà. Alors, est-ce que vous pouvez dire si vous voyez
So can you tell me if you can see my slides? Yes, we can.
Bon, je savais pas que j'avais mis
I didn't know I had created the special effects in this PowerPoint presentation. My name is Nathalie Mettot. I'm the Director of Research Innovation at Collège de la Cité. And today I thought we could have a session that focuses more on the human resources aspect in for managers in our role as managers. What I'll share today is the results of my personal experience, and I thought it would be interesting to hear from other managers to share so that they could share their life experience and share some best practices to help people who are new managers to find their way. Because oftentimes we're not necessarily born managers, we're experts in a specific field, and we end up being responsible for a team of people,
il y a des défis. Alors,
and that poses challenges. Well, that's what I want to look at today with you. So we'll have three short,
5 à 7 minutes.
5 to 7 minute, maybe even 10-minute presentations. And after that, we'll have a questions period to exchange on your personal experience.
Donc, comment je suis devenue
So
gestionnaire?
how did I become a manager? I'm a trained biochemist. I was the training committee at the Collège de la Cité for almost 15 years. I have no training in management. I was always interested in science. I never thought I could be a manager, entrepreneur, uh, like I am today. This is something that developed over the years, and I became a manager overnight in 2015, the year, very year where we became a technology access center. So in the transition from teacher or professor to administrative personnel, I was an executive consultant. I was a professional. I had no team under me. And overnight, the person who was my boss resigned from the college. I ended up being responsible for a 5 people team. There was no reflection period. It happened overnight, unforeseen circumstance. I accepted the challenge with a lot of enthusiasm. I was very naive to. I didn't have time to read any management textbook or to follow any training. So I faced challenges. First of all, challenges were to determine my management style. As in any new job, you need to know how you will address situations, and it takes a bit of time. I would say it took 2 years before I found my management style. I had to learn to manage difficult employees. I am a person who sees positive things everywhere. I don't see what the problem is. Uh, so it was very difficult to act at specific moments at the right time. And I had to improve my communication skills. That's what I'm going to talk about today. I wanted to tell you that at a point, I found it so difficult that I thought of resigning from my job. I thought of finding something else. I thought, HR management is too difficult for me. I won't manage in this job. But now look at me, I persevered and it worked. And what I'm going to share today is 5 best practices, 5 things I learned within these challenges. So the first thing I learned is you need to understand that HR management is difficult. What I tell my managers now, now that I'm the director, is that there is no technical challenge. There's no equipment that's going to break. There is no funding request that's going to be as difficult as managing a team of people. We're all different. We all have our complexities.
It is a part of manager that is actually more difficult. So to manage a budget, develop different things, understand the new grant rules, and so on and so forth. So the best of approach, is very difficult with the different rules on staffing in human resources, dealing with all sorts of things. So this is very difficult. And we must look into this, and we must be supported and guided through this. Lesson number two is the importance of communications. You may say that this is something that we usually say, but we don't necessarily do this properly. So imagine that I am a young manager. We just have an access to technology and so on. So I have indicators to follow, projects to deliver, all sorts of things to do, and my head is focused on results. So I absolutely want the center to have great success, income, and everything. So I'm very motivated into this. But am I there for my team? Do I listen to my team? And if you have no team, you have nothing. So you all want to be in a high performance mode. So they have to understand, what is the goal and everything. So it's difficult. You have nothing otherwise, and it's difficult to say my door is always open. I'm there to listen to you, and so on and so forth. But people are not going to turn to you and come to you if they have difficulties. You cannot expect that when you meet them in group, they're going to raise their hands and tell you about their problems. It doesn't work. But what I do is a face-to-face meeting where you're seated together. I have no pencil in my hand, and I'm just saying, how are things going? How are you? You have to give time to the person to express it himself. We don't take a look at your watch. You can't think about anything else. Like, for example, I have a demand to submit or anything like that. You have to be fully present with the person you're dealing with. You have to be aware of everything. At times, I remember looking at my watch, staring at my phone, but you have to really think about how you're being perceived by the person, and seek openness, communication. I was a champion saying, things are going to go well, the person will understand, everything will be settled, and so on. I have lots of hope, but this is not the way it works in the real life. You have to be able to say the difficult things, and for that, you have some courses, trainings, anything else. I can refer you to that. For me, it was an enormous learning. Everything can be said in full respect and finding the right way of doing it, and you have to do it as soon as possible. If something goes on and you know it in your personal relationships, you're not going to say to your spouse or companion, you told me this 6 months ago, and now I'm really shocked. It doesn't work that way. Third lesson is to have the right position and good profiles for the positions. Take a look at the structure of your positions. You have the right types of positions for the missions to accomplish, and once it's done, you have to wonder if you have the right profiles, the right people in the right position. Perhaps you inherited of some of the positions and the people that are in those positions. So you have to take a look at it, closely. I've worked at this for several years. We worked at our structure. It is a solid structure, and I recruited great profiles. What is my manager's style? I work in collaboration, and you have to be fully aware of what is going on. If there's not this, it will not work out. People will have to abide by the values of the organization, be able to follow the path and have a common goal. So fourth lesson is to favor a labor environment that is healthy. We want people to have pleasure, that there is a space for joke, humor, and self joking on and so on. So we want to make sure that there is a healthy labor environment. You can't expect that everyone will like you as a manager. You expect everyone to like you. No, that's not the case. People have to respect you because you have difficult decisions to make that are not going to be liked by everyone, and this is a nature of being a manager. If you have an healthy labor environment, the decisions will be good, perhaps people will respect you, and this is what is important. Respect, it's got to be harmonious as relationship. And the last advice that I have for you this morning, actually, and the lesson that I've learned, one of the takeaways is be a model. You are under a spotlight, so whatever you do, you're being observed. If there's an anniversary of one of our team members, what do you write a card or anything like that? And you have a family member and someone dies and everything, there must be a card that is handed to everyone. The way that you express yourself when you write emails, when you write text messages, everything is being watched. So you must say to yourself that you are a model, and people will get inspired by what you do. You would like your employees and your team to do things the way that you would like them to do and treat the others. So the other thing, I don't mean to discourage you this morning. Trust yourselves. This is my message. And not easy to say, and wonder, do I have the right approach and everything? It's not easy, not easy job. That is a manager. So no one is perfect, whether it's a manager or employees. If we commit a mistake, well, what we do is we correct it and we say that we're sorry about that. You can also refer to some texts, some books, and you need perhaps a mentor, a colleague. If you have difficulties, don't dwell in misery and problems. Do get a consult. And as I told you, just admit your mistakes. We're all human beings, so that's all as far as I'm concerned. And I will give the floor to Jean. Yes, good day, everyone. Thank you, Nathalie. I believe that you covered lots of points here. And I will bring this back to, can you see my shared screen? I'm sorry, I'm not on the right page. Can you view my screen? I cannot see anything from here. Not yet, Jean. Just wait a moment, please. Here I am. So, that's it. Can you see my shared screen? Perfect. Okay. So I prepared my presentation and I entitled it 4 Actions to Better Manage a Team. Of course, I'm sorry. Of course, some points are going to be repeat of what Nathalie just told you. So as far as I'm concerned, I'm an agronomist since 1989. In the 90s, I was active in teaching in Laywoods and talking about biological agriculture. And I've worked on that, and I was a consultant in the year 2000 transfer of biological knowledge and so on. I was also a researcher as a master students in the 80s, and then I joined the CTAB team in 2011. Now, following the departure of the director, I took over in June of 2016 at the CTAB. Now, when I took up this position, I believe that I had two assets. One was my professional path because I was specifically active in applied research and consulting and carrying out information. So in 2016, I was already part of the center and I knew everyone. So in a certain way, I was well prepared to become a manager. But as many of us, I had no training as a manager. One of the actions that is critical, of course, is communication. And I took up a training which is called M3I many years ago in team management. And the basis of that training that goes over a long period of time is to learn how to communicate and manage according to the different individuals and their characters. So this brings us back to four major types of personalities. M3 I is a judge, the artist, the explorator, and the warrior. So the judge is often the one that is very Cartesian, analytic, and as compliant also. The artist is emotions, the social aspect, and so on. Explorator actually are very innovating people, all about imagination, but quite independent. And the warrior was the great worker. If you give him a mission, he will carry it out. And is very loyal. So I would tell you that this helped me very much understanding my team and adapt myself uh, in all of the communications that I had with them, with all of the individuals, even in sub teams dynamics. As Natalie mentioned, listening is certainly important. And I would highlight also that when you welcome new employees, this is a critical moment. You must take time to accompany the new employees, plan their integration, see who is going to support them within the team, and who will have more frequent contacts with the new employees. When I took up the management of the center in 2016, we were 20-person team. Now we're 35. So I had to do it quite often. And I would tell you that globally, rest of the team and myself are getting better with integrating new comers, but we're not perfect yet. Regarding the integration of new employees, I've set up a program of co-assessment, and I believe that this is my preferred approach. Always start with positive elements when you start an assessment because this opens very well a discussion. Now, I believe that each person has challenges, strengths, and a path that they must follow. How do you integrate a person in your team? How can a person determine what he can bring to you, and what can the company bring to that person? So you have to listen, and perhaps you hired someone for a very very specific task. And along the way, you realize that that person has skills for other types of tasks, for example. And so you must show that you're flexible enough to direct the path of a person. You have to listen to that and to see that if things doesn't work out, and before saying it doesn't work out with that person, and we have to get rid of that person, you have to take a look at how things can work out in a different way. So it is also important to feel that persons are actually stakeholders when you're talking about strategic planning, considering a new project, in order to rally everyone under a common goal. Another action that is important as a manager is how to delegate. So being able to delegate is an investment. It takes up time, and eventually it offers some freedom for the manager. The more things you have to do, and the less control you have over the different tasks, the more you have to delegate. So you have to accept this. However, you must not do it in any way. First of all, when you delegate, you have to be able to support that person, to verify periodically before trusting completely a person. Another thing that I tend to do is to find compromise between the needs of the center and the employees' needs, without imposing upon them things. I believe that no one wants to be found in a situation where 80% of the things that you must do, you don't feel like doing. So you have to give the opportunity to people to develop a taste for what they're developing as a mandate. The other thing is to surround yourself with the right people. No manager has all of the skills. As Natalie said, it is important that the structure reflects the needs, and we must have a plan indicating the growth of the center. It wasn't easy for me to convince the public college management to hire more people. I have an operation manager that takes a look at all of the experience of the students and so on that she's hiring, and I trust her completely on all of this. And this is very important that we may delegate some responsibilities, so that person approves vacation, holidays, training, and so on and so forth. Now, one must not hesitate to call upon an external consultant when you feel that things go beyond your own skills and competencies. There's one thing that I would like to suggest is to always have at least another person that knows the task that must be accomplished and what it represents as an investment in training. For example, if a person injures herself, or something else happen, we cannot be found in a difficult situation. So we avoid that. We must always have one responsible person, but I do allow persons to work together and as a binomial. So they both work on a project, for example. So the other thing is the human capital is one of the greatest wealth, and we have to take care of these people by listening to them and take care of them as a manager with the delegates around them. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Jean. Dele, over to you.
You should see my slides now. Thank you, everyone. Good morning, and I'm pleased to be part of this panel this morning. I would like to share 5 lessons that I've learned in my TAC leadership journey over a while. But just before then, let me just give you a very short profile. So, Technology Access Center for Aerospace and Manufacturing. I will not focus on talking about the team, but I will talk about myself because I'm sure you would like to know about my leadership journey. So I joined TACAM in 2012 as the first research professional. That was my title, and the first one to hold that title at Red River College, actually. I started leading the team in 2016. So that was 4 years after I've been within the team. And prior to joining the Technology Access Center, I was just completing my PhD at the University of Manitoba. And between my undergraduate degree and going to the graduate school, I did work in the management consulting industry. My educational background is in metallurgy and aerospace materials. And I would characterize my leadership journey as a mix of opportunities and also some personal efforts to grow personally. So you've listened to other speakers, especially when Natalie started a presentation. She was trying to explain to us that there is actually no particular manual for TAC leadership. We all learned on the job. There were lots of mistakes that we made along the journey. There were lots of great things that happened. And we just took the lessons and we continue to move on. So I'll be focusing on the 5 lessons that I've learned. I just package them as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lessons. And I hope that they're going to be very useful for you in your TAC leadership too. So let's focus on you as the individual leading the team. The first lesson I picked along the way is that we need to always strive to select the best and to build a team. And I will try to be explicit about what I mean about building a team. So I recently completed a book written by Jim Collins. Some of you might have seen the book before, Good to Great. And in one of the chapters of the book, he did explain in detail the concept that he called who first, then what? Who first, then what? And the mistake that many of us make is that we create a very grand plan, we create a big strategy, and then we try to look for people to fit into that plan. So we already saw the end, and then we are trying to plug in people to fulfill that particular end. The truth is that that model in most cases doesn't work. The first decision that we need to make is to first of all build a team, because when we build a team and the team is consists of the people that can help us to drive a vision, then we're on our way to success. So let me give you an example of what we did at TACAM. So when I became the leader of the TAC in 2016, we were just 5 members. And one of us was was going to retire in 1 month. So basically, I had 4 members of the team, including myself. So myself and 3 staff. So I was so fortunate enough to have the 3 other people as very great individuals. They were ready to work together to build a team. And part of what we proposed in 2016-2017 TAC renewal was that within the renewal period or within the next 5 years, we will grow to 10 full-time employees. Strong decisions we had to make in building the team. The first one was that we were going to be hiring or bringing people into the team based on competition only, because we wanted to focus on competence. Now, imagine your TAC, you don't have unlimited budget. In most cases, we're very tight on the margins. We barely make it through on many projects. So we don't have the luxury of just bringing people in and out. We have to be very strategic about that. So we made the decision that we will focus a lot on competence. We will hire the team. We will make it onto our team if you have passed through the same rigorous process that brought everybody in. The second thing was that we focused on the attitude and the soft skills of the people. Our belief was that you could have a rocket scientist. If that person cannot work with people, they can't help you, they can't go too far. And we actually had an example of something like that in our team when we had an issue. a person that came in and out, and it quite didn't work out. A lot of technical skills, but then a little bit lacking in how to work with people. So we believe that if people have great attitude, they are able to train themselves on the skills and the competency that is required to do the job. So we focus a lot on attitude. So the first lesson was that we need to select the best people, and then we need to build a team. The second thing, I call it let the team know, show the way. Now, your team wants to see you as a leader and not as a manager. And the discussion on the difference between a leader and a manager, we can save that for another day. But you must be able to tell the team where you are going. If you're going to learn anything as a leader, uh, you need to learn how to be visionary, like trying to see ahead of time, is having that foresight, uh, which is very, very important. It's usually the most difficult thing for leaders to do, to envision the future, to say this is where we are definitely going to be in 2 years or in 3 years or in 5 years. But we need to realize that it's actually the only thing that really makes you a leader, if you think about it critically. So in our team, we adopted two approaches. The first one was that we wanted to ensure that at the beginning of every year, everyone knows what is expected of them. So we did not hide any performance metrics from anyone. We made sure that we showed the team the goalposts. So we used to call it the goalposts. So at the beginning of every year, we have a list of all the goalposts. Everyone knows where we're going, and they are able to relate with how they should contribute to making that happen. So the second thing is that I try to engage my team members on letting them know what the future would look like. And when I say the future, I'm talking about their own future on the team. I wanted to give people a career. I remember in 2016, just before I took on the leadership role of the team, I knocked the office door of my supervisor. I sat down with him and I told him that I had a question that was really bothering me. And that question was around what becomes of me in the team. It was like I couldn't see the future. I didn't really know where my career was going. So if it was important to me then, I believed that it was important to everyone on the team. So we try to explain to our team members what the career in applied research really leads to, how they can grow, how the opportunities can unfold for them. I think that was important. So let the team know, show the way. We need to be in front. We need to lead them from the front. The third thing is to develop a culture and set the principles. So the relationships that you develop within the team really matters a lot. And when we talk about relationships, it's easy to just say, oh, just relate with people. But what does that really mean? I think as leaders, we need to model that. Part of it is developing how we do work. We have to have a proper culture on how we do work here so that when new members come in, they flow into that same culture. It could be how we do work in terms of how do we set our priorities? What are the deliverables? How do we organize ourselves internally? And it could be setting up principles like what does trust look like, accountability, communication, progress? How do we navigate through all these things? And I remember that 4 years ago, I did sit down with my team and I asked them what these things mean to them. We had brainstorming sessions, and the team came up with what trust means for them, what progress means for them, what communication, effective communication means for them. We had a common definition of what success would look like, and it makes people to feel that they are involved. So if you model it, they will follow it. And the goal is to create a strong, focused team. The fourth lesson, remove the cap, release the people. Get rid of the lead. That's what I would call it. So in most cases, we try to manage people to the details, try to get involved in everything. I noticed that that model doesn't work. We just need to tell people what to focus on and wait for them to surprise us with their own genius. I like the way Dr. Miles Monroe puts this. He said that great leaders make themselves unnecessary. If you are needed at every meeting, in every project, at all times, I think you may actually be setting yourself up for trouble. So if you are a great leader, you will make yourself unnecessary. And what it means is that you let others do the work. They are also competent. They may not get it right the first time, but you give them an opportunity to grow as they work with you in the task. Let them grow into managing projects. And I can give you an example. On our team, we don't really have any hierarchy in the team. We all work as a single team, and everyone is a leader in their own right. So we've given people opportunities to learn how to write proposals, how to manage projects, and we have people that are doing it for the first time. So I don't currently lead any project. I just focus on the opportunities relating with the community and bringing those opportunities back into the team. Note that your team cannot grow or scale without releasing them. And the last but not the least is to reward and affirm your team members. The truth is that we hear many more negative things than positive things on the average. Just think about your life every day, listening to news and listening to people talk and all of that. There are so many negative things out there. You can't build your team sustainably
Je crois
without
que il est important de déterminer comment ça fonctionne. Et il y a aussi des ressources à déterminer. Ce n'est pas nécessaire d'avoir en fait, des actions dans le milieu économique. On travaille la nuit, on travaille pour des salaires différents. Mais il faut qu'il y ait des incitatifs, donner-leur des occasions de formation, des occasions de croître. Et plusieurs études montrent que lorsque les gens se sentent bien et à l'aise, leur rendement est plus élevé. Il faut se concentrer sur le bien-être des employés. Et il y a des gens qui disent la raison pour laquelle ils vont au travail tous les jours, c'est qu'ils aiment parler avec leurs collègues, ils aiment savoir qu'est-ce qui se passe dans la vie de leurs collègues, ils aiment avoir cette espèce d'environnement social, c'est important. Et je, je veux que tout le monde soit de bons leaders, apprenons les uns des autres et permettons-nous aux uns et aux autres d'apprendre et de croître ensemble.
Fantastic. Thank you very much.
Merveilleux, merci beaucoup. Merci à tous et à toutes, Nathalie et Jean et
I guess if
toute l'équipe.
anybody has any questions, feel free
S'il y a des
to
questions, n'hésitez pas à les écrire dans le chat
session site and I'll moderate.
sur le site de la séance plénière. Je serai le modérateur de ces questions
Presenters who've seen your colleagues' presentations.
et aux autres conférenciers qui ont vu leurs collègues, en fait, les présentations de leurs collègues. Est-ce qu'il y a des messages clés que vous retenez de tout ça?
Yes, but I also want to invite participants to write in the chat their take-home messages that they noted from our 3 presentations. But to start the discussion, I'll share my take-home messages from Jean and Ellie. So build a team. It's true that we focus on technical skills, but that's often a mistake, and we should also think about the soft skills and the ability to work with people. So that's the one from Delhi. Thank you. And Jean, very important to involve the team in the strategic plan, the vision, the mission. It's very important to engage them. And my take-home message is you're not alone. So if you have any difficulties, don't sit in your office being miserable. Reach out to somebody either in the network, at your institution, anywhere. So we all have challenges. That's the reality. So, and we're together in that.
Thank you. Maybe we'll go to Jean.
Take-home messages. Well, I'd say developing communication skills is really key to everything. I know it's said over and over, but that's it. That's the main one. I like the idea of complementarity that Delhi evoked. I think that's something also really important when hiring and even for project management and doing projects, complementarity in the teams or sub teams. And yeah, and that's it.
Great. Thank you, Jean. Delhi?
Yeah, thank you, everyone. So from what Natalie said, there is something that really struck me really much is the fact that none of the TAC leaders today got to where they are at without learning great lessons along the way. So it's like learning on the job. This is something that is real. Before we started all this, nobody really knew exactly how things should work out. And the truth is that we grew through the years into what it is today, and the process still continues. There is nobody that has arrived yet. We are all still in process. We are all still work in progress. I think I picked that up. It's quite very important to note that it's a journey. It's not a destination in itself. From John, thank you very much. There is something there that you said that in most cases, I think it's very easy for us. It's like a slippery slope. We can quickly get into that. And it's that of walking alone, not reaching out for help. As TAC leaders, sometimes it can be lonely. And that is the truth, because you're trying to do something externally that may not be the thinking of many people internally that are focusing on student programming and all that, even including leadership sometimes. And, sometimes it can feel like you're alone. One of the things that we have done at Red River College is that the TAC leaders and some of the research leaders, we have touch points almost regularly just to compare notes. And I think that shouldn't just be within the college alone. Even if we have colleagues across colleges, across provincial boundaries that we can compare notes with, I think it's going to be very important. And when we need help, we should reach out for help, whether it's through consultants or through other leaders. I think we should be able to reach out to people and learn from them, or just allow them to help us.
Excellent. Thank you, Dele. So a question from Richard Gale. Dele, I like the idea of team working across capabilities. How does this work in a union environment where roles are clearly defined?
Yeah, I guess, is that a question for me, Ken?
We'll start with you. I know it's a tough one, but I know
Yeah,
everybody has
it's
thoughts on this one, the union question.
Yeah, so the role is well defined, but Richard, you also know that as research leaders, we have an opportunity to contribute into how those roles are defined. I'm not sure how it works in all other colleges, but one thing that I try to do, and I have a few colleagues on the call today that can also testify to that I try to stick my head in it when I can, to ensure that when those roles are being defined, we are involved in how they are defined. The truth also is that when people are coming into our team, as research leaders, we also have an opportunity to be the gatekeeper in terms of we are involved in the hiring process. So at that point, we have an opportunity to tweak a little bit the kind of competence or skill that we require on the job, especially when we have an opportunity to work with HR to create the questions that will be asked during the interview, and also to sit on the panel. So one thing I've noticed is that especially if you inherited a team, sometimes it's challenging, especially when the leader that recruited people into the team did not pay attention to the competencies and you inherit the team. It can be challenging. But the best is to make sure we select the right people right at the beginning, because trying to mold people, trying to get, especially when people don't have the right attitude, it's really difficult in a team. But we have an opportunity at the entry point to kind of sieve and try to censor who is coming into the team. I think within that unionized environment, we still have that little window of opportunity to select the right people. It's all about being thorough with the process. Sometimes we get referrals. People just say, "Hey, I have a friend who's a very great engineer. Can you hire them and let them come into the team?" My approach always is, okay, great. They have great credentials. Can they also just go through the process that has been set up, and then we take everybody through that same rigorous process? I think if we do that, even within the union environment, we can have the best people.
Fantastic. Thank you, Dele. Natalie, Jean, thoughts on the union question?
Well, in our case, it's quite new. It's since September 2020. And well, for my professionals, I'd say, for like the technical team was already unionized, but it's a big change. Everyone was a bit, I would say, on their toes, not knowing, but it's going well for now. And there's a part of it that is out of our control. That's the part that's not fun. It's like we cannot act on it right now. For the TAC or the CCTTs in Quebec, it's defined at the provincial level what will be there's no research category for college in the convention collective, the union
Collective agreement.
In the collective agreement.
And so, but that will come into place eventually. So I participated in the development of that, but it's not in place. So it's a funny thing where my researchers and my people in technical advising are considered as pedagogical counselor, obviously, teaching counselor. That's the category of work they're paid according to. Of course, it doesn't correspond at all to what they're doing, but so yeah, it's a bit strange. I think something good will emerge from it. I'm glad for the professionals of the center that they're now unionized, having access to a good insurance program, and definitely some advantages. Yeah.
Great. Natalie?
Oui, je vais répondre en français. C'est un excellent
Yes, I'm
point.
going to answer in French. That's an excellent point. The way the HR service works, we need to find people that correspond perfectly to the position. We cannot have the approach that Deli mentioned. We find a member for the team. We want to build a team. They need to correspond to what we're looking for. That's a huge challenge. The solution to that might be to get our positions to evolve when we realize we're not able to fulfill what's written on paper. But at La Cité, we are unionized. We are unionized as support personnel. The administrative personnel is not unionized. However, when we hire people, we still need to make sure that they are consistent with the requirements of the position. And sometimes it's difficult to conciliate both.
Excellent. Andrea had a neat contribution in the chat. This discussion's dear to my heart. Over the last 6 years as managing the Center for Oil Stand Sustainability, I've learned a lot of these lessons, some lately. I would also add that being open to change is super important. We're going through a reorg and changing some of my previous responsibilities. I'm learning to accept change to my baby. The three of you are veteran TAC leaders, and I'm assuming where your center was 5-10 years ago looks completely different now. How do you deal with the inevitable change and evolution when your role in relation to the center changes? Maybe Deli?
Okay, thank you. So change is inevitable. So my opinion is that when the wind of change is blowing, you better catch the the wind. That's exactly what it is. And the COVID-19 pandemic has taught us a lot of lessons, lots of lessons. And I can give our attack as an example. A very large portion of our revenue used to come from contract training. And 3-4 years ago, we made a decision that we are going to balance our portfolio in terms of the number of research versus training versus technical services and all that. It was a great decision because when COVID hit, the part of our business that was seriously impacted the most was the training, because nobody was showing up in any of the facilities, and our training dollar reduced to almost zero. So the only way we have survived the period was that we ramped up on the number of research contracts. And it was a situation where we actually had many more projects than our team could handle at a point. So throughout the pandemic, we were able to maintain uh, the business. Otherwise, we would have closed down if we were not strategic about it. We didn't know COVID was coming, but we knew that something was wrong if we depended too much on only one aspect of our business for cash revenues. So that's one. And if you look at it again, some of the tasks are in the technology areas, and technology is moving very quickly. If you look at it now, we are talking about metaverse now. And the last time I met my team, this was just like last Friday. I brought the discussion on this new metaverse thing. I brought it up. It was funny. We saw that Facebook is renaming themselves Meta, but it's not just about Facebook. It's about what is imminent in the world. People are creating avatars everywhere and trying uh, to create this virtual world where everybody will be trading there, will be buying real estate there, will be doing everything there. Whether we like it or not, this is imminent, that is coming. So as a team, as a TAC, what should we be doing today so that we are positioned to be able to take advantage of what is coming in the future? I think that's important. So it's being ahead, is trying to look ahead of time and trying to define for our team what that would mean. So if you know that if you are in technologies now and you have nothing to do with big data, nothing to do with AI, nothing to do with machine learning, you are yet to start working. That's the truth. So how do we do this? And sometimes the skills are also not there. So we try to see if we can hire people before we get the job. It's counterintuitive, and sometimes it's difficult to do that within a college system when you have to show the need before you hire the people. But if we have the opportunity, we try to push that edge. We bring people in so that we can grow a new area. And that's one of the things we can do. If you see an opportunity and you have a little bit of budget, bring people in, let them help you to develop that area. So there are lots of things that we can do to adapt to change. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Dele. Thoughts from Natalie or Jean?
Yeah. In terms of change, I was lucky enough to drive the change. So I was not, influenced by a decision from someone else. So I was part of developing the structure, the new positions. I was center of that. So I'm okay with adaptation to new situations. So it was positive in the end.
Excellent.
Je vais répondre en français.
I'll answer in French. Yes, it's quite a wide-reaching subject that is adapting to change. We also need to adapt to the growth of the center. I would say that the risk when the center is growing as a senior manager is that we are more distant. There are more people in the team, so we cannot maintain the same relationship, strong, close relationship with everyone as when we, as per when we had a smaller team. That is a challenge. Also, there are changes that are pushed upon us by crises. For example, somebody from the team leaves and that destabilizes things. In these cases, I would say that it's important to have a good team, to listen to the team as well, to have good players and to listen to their needs. These are not easy times when somebody leaves the team. Adapting to the technology changes or to what's coming, that's another aspect of change. I would say it's important to have people in the team who have the mandate to be scouts or forerunners, that they're people who are looking towards the future. They're waiting for novelty. So you need to be sure that you identify people who play that role among your team. They're on their toes and looking for change, for upcoming change, and they can share that with the team. These are the three items that come to mind when we think about change or adaptation to change.
Excellent, fantastic. Thank you, Jean. Richard had a neat proposition in the chat of Tech Access Canada brokering a small exchange program where leaders have a chance to spend a week at another TAC, observing how things work and learning from each other on the ground. At Camosun, they'd be happy to host visiting leaders, and he'd love the opportunity to visit and learn from his colleagues across the country. It's a fantastic idea. It's something we've been advocating for since 2017. It's an expertise exchange that we're hoping to operationalize. It's been trouble finding support to make it happen, but it's a great idea, and we know there's interest in the membership at the operations, managerial, administrative, and technical levels. So we'll see what we can do to push that one forward. Wondering if anybody has any concluding thoughts. Maybe we'll wrap up a bit early, give people a bio break, and then begin again at high noon. So Natalie, maybe start with you. Any concluding thoughts?
I think we said a lot. I just want to reiterate the fact that we're a network, we're together. If you need help, if you need support, don't hesitate to reach out to anybody. And thank you, Ken, for this session.
Dele?
Thank you, everyone. Well, I wanted to say that you still have many more bullets, just keep firing. So applied research leadership is a very great career. I thought I would do it for 3 years and I would quit, but it's been almost 10 years now and I'm still bubbling and still doing it. So it's a very rewarding one and very enjoyable too. So I just say enjoy the journey, whether you know how to do it now or not, whether you got it figured out or not, just stick your head into it, just keep moving forward and just hope for the best. Thanks.
Thank you, Dele. Jean?
Oui, alors être gestionnaire
Yes, being the manager of a TAC is a huge challenge, but it's a beautiful professional challenge. There are highs and lows, of course. We always need to remain hopeful and know that we can keep solutions by having the right people on the team, by listening to people. And nothing is dramatic, nothing cannot be repaired. In my case, I'm looking at taking my retirement within about 15 months. I'm not saying that this cuts me off from the next year, but it's a completely different way to think as a manager because I need to see how I can transfer the management of the center. I need to set everything up for this transfer to happen. It's an additional challenge.
Thank you, Jean. Great point to end on, the importance of succession planning. So with that, we'll take a little pause and come back in 8 minutes. We're going to start promptly at 12 o'clock Eastern time. And then so we'll provide an update on Tech Access Canada's activities. And then our special guest, Dr. Robert Luke, will be joining us from eCampus Ontario to present to the members. So again, thank you very much, Jean, Dele, Natalie. Awesome presentations. Thank you everybody for the questions in the chat.